The Israeli military expects possible war soon and has raised its alert level. The uneasy ceasefire remains. Let's examine the situation today. Let's begin. First, an NBC reporter in the US said the Trump administration deemed the war that started on February 28 to be over under the War Powers Act just one day before Congress's Iran war approval deadline. May 1st is the deadline for war without congressional approval, and now that it has arrived, they're saying the war has effectively ended. However, unlike that, Israel continues to prepare for war. Israel is holding daily intensive consultations to prepare for a possible breakdown in US-Iran ceasefire talks as early as next week. President Trump reportedly received a new operational plan from the commander of the US Central Command on April 30th to deliver a final blow. The main point of this report is a short and powerful airstrike. The plan is to carry out precise strikes on key targets, including infrastructure facilities, in a short period of time to bring Iran back to the negotiating table and secure concessions on the nuclear issue. There are also plans under consideration to deploy ground forces to occupy parts of the Hormuz Strait and to send in special forces to seize Iran's highly enriched uranium stockpiles. According to a Bloomberg report, the US Central Command requested the deployment of the hypersonic missile K-Eagle to the Middle East. This suggests that the US has begun preparations in case President Trump decides to resume the attack, as reported by Bloomberg. If this actually happens, it would be the first time the US has deployed hypersonic missiles in a real combat situation. While it may seem that the war is effectively over in the US due to the War Powers Act, the actual movements of the US military tell a very different story. On April 30th alone, the Israeli Ministry of Defense received 6,500 tons of US-made military equipment, including 1,000 rounds of ammunition and light armored tactical vehicles. According to the Israeli Ministry of Defense, these supplies were delivered via 2 cargo ships and many aircraft. The US-made equipment was immediately distributed to military units throughout Israel. Amir Baram, Secretary General of the Israeli Ministry of Defense, stated that the procurement of military supplies will be further strengthened and expanded in the coming weeks. According to the ministry's own announcements, since the outbreak of war with Iran on February 28th, Israel has received more than 115,600 tons of military equipment through a total of 403 aircraft and 10 ships. Israeli Defense Minister Katz has also stated that Israel is fully prepared to resume war with Iran and is waiting for US approval. As a result, even though the US is effectively unable to continue the war due to the War Powers Act, Israel continues to prepare for war. This time, Israeli Defense Minister Katz stated that while they support the US's diplomatic efforts toward Iran and are providing the necessary resources, they may soon have to take action themselves to ensure their objectives are achieved. The targets Israel is considering striking this time include Iran's energy facilities and key government infrastructure. Naturally, in response to Israel's actions, Iran has warned that its patience is reaching its limit and that if the situation escalates, it will take unprecedented measures. Additionally, this time, Tasnim news agency reported that if war breaks out again, the US military could be targeted even inside Gulf royal palaces, and especially that the UAE has become a hub for Israelis. They stated that if war breaks out again, they will respond differently. For now, Iran, Israel, and the US have all used the ceasefire period to regroup and rearm. If war resumes, both sides could suffer even more devastating blows. What we need to pay attention to here is how the UAE will respond. As of April 30, the UAE Ministry of Foreign Affairs has issued a travel ban on Iran, Lebanon, and Iraq. They told their citizens in those regions to return home right away. The government's call for a complete withdrawal shows they see the Middle East situation as truly dangerous, not just a minor warning. At the same time, the UAE is rapidly expanding military cooperation with Israel to strengthen its air defense capabilities. The newly introduced Iron Beam is a different type of defense system compared to the existing Iron Dome. The Iron Beam uses high-powered lasers to directly destroy approaching drones and short-range missiles. It is characterized by low interception costs and the ability to respond continuously. This is the first confirmed combat deployment of this system in the UAE. Also, Israeli military personnel being sent to the UAE indicates cooperation has moved beyond equipment support to active operations. The UAE has faced ballistic missile and drone attacks from Iran during this conflict. With hundreds of attacks concentrated on them, the limitations of their defense system were revealed, and as a result, they have immediately moved to reinforce their military capabilities. Cooperation with Israel has quickly increased, and new systems are being integrated into the air defense network. These changes suggest military blocs in the Middle East are becoming clearer, with forces centered around Iran and those connecting Israel and the Gulf states both growing stronger. The UAE's response is an example that shows how a country most directly affected by the current situation is making its choices. At the same time, it indicates that military tensions across the Middle East are entering a new phase. So what will happen to this most important war? The War Powers Act clearly states that war can be waged for 60 days without explicit approval. May 1st marks the 60th day. This is quite ambiguous. First, most importantly, the Hormuz blockade is still in place. The War Powers Act also has many gray areas. It's also unclear if the 60-day period resets when the current military operation against Iran ends and a new one begins. Additionally, there is a precedent of conducting military operations for over 60 days, notably during the Clinton administration in the 1999 Kosovo War. The U.S. military bombed for 78 days, surpassing the 60-day limit without congressional approval. The administration avoided legal restrictions by arguing that Congress's allocation of the war budget itself was an implicit approval of the military operation. The Obama administration also ignored the 60-day limit during the 2011 Libya airstrikes, interpreting that airstrikes without ground troops did not constitute hostilities under the law. Because of this, there are concerns that this situation might be handled in the same way again. Above all, the U.S. Secretary of Defense, Hegseth, is causing another controversy with his remarks in Congress. Secretary Hegseth told the U.S. Senate Armed Services Committee that a ceasefire doesn't count toward days at war. Secretary Hegseth said, "We are currently in a ceasefire. We understand that during a ceasefire, the 60-day deadline is temporarily paused or stopped." Secretary Hegseth implied that since a ceasefire is in effect and 60 days of war haven't passed, there's no immediate need for congressional approval. Of course, in reality, there have been no actual hostilities since April 7. Whether a ceasefire is included in the period of war or not is not clearly defined. So, we'll have to wait and see. It's unlikely President Trump will halt military action or wait for congressional approval under the War Powers Act. The 1973 War Powers Act requires the president to get congressional approval within 60 days of deploying troops without Congress's consent. However, many presidents have called it unconstitutional and have a long history of bypassing it. Currently, Defense Secretary Hegseth is using a similar argument. By interpreting that the ceasefire period does not count as days of war, he is arbitrarily extending the 60-day time limit. This is a strategy that targets the gray area where there are no clear regulations in the law. President Trump prioritized presidential commander-in-chief authority over congressional checks even in his previous term, so he will likely decide independently again, citing national security urgency. Therefore, even if the legal deadline passes on May 1st, the U.S. military will likely continue operations under a new name or command system. Israel knows about this possible U.S. legal workaround and is speeding up preparations for full-scale war by accepting military equipment quickly. Regardless of the legal deadline, military tensions in the Middle East have entered a phase where they may be prolonged depending on the administration's pragmatic decisions. The most immediate variable in the current situation is the Strait of Hormuz. Currently, the strait has not been fully normalized, and due to military tensions, it is experiencing a situation close to a de facto blockade. Roughly 20% of global maritime oil shipments move through this area, and any disruption would cause international oil prices to react immediately. Oil prices have risen sharply, and the market now reflects further shocks. As Korea depends on Middle Eastern oil, any blockage there makes the supply unstable. Refineries can rely on stockpiles for a while, but if the situation continues, import costs will soar and directly impact domestic prices. Higher gasoline and diesel prices raise logistics costs, causing food and goods prices to rise overall. Electricity rates are also affected. When fuel prices for power generation go up, KEPCO's cost burden increases, leading to pressure to raise rates. Export companies are also affected. When energy costs rise, manufacturing costs go up, and price competitiveness weakens. Energy-intensive industries like petrochemicals and steel are especially hard hit. Exchange rate volatility may rise as higher energy import costs strain the current account and weaken the won. If the strait stays blocked, the entire Korean economy will face pressure, causing a chain reaction of ripple effects beyond just a short-term shock. The Strait of Hormuz remains blocked, and it's currently controlled by hardliners. How do you think the situation will unfold from here?